Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sophie Hackett, the Curator of Photography here at the Art Gallery of Ontario, and it is my great pleasure today for Art in the Spotlight to be in conversation with Toronto-based artist Laurie Kang. Hi, Laurie.
Hi.
Before we get started, I would also just like to say that the Art Gallery of Ontario operates on land that is the territory of the Anishinaabe, Mississauga Nation, and was also the territory of the Wendat and Haudenosaunee. The Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is also governed by a treaty between the federal government of Canada and the Mississaugas of the Credit Anishinaabe Nation. I'd also like to give thanks to TD and the Ready Commitment, who are the lead sponsor of the talks and performances, such as this one. So thank you for your support. So, Laurie, how are you?
I'm doing all right, yeah. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. It's getting cold today, October 1st. Here we are, the fall. I'm going to share my screen and then we will show some pictures of some of the work you've been up to recently. So this is, we'll just get right into it, right? This is the, as you walked in, I walked into Franz Kaka in July, just this past summer. This is sort of the scene that greeted me coming in the main door. These objects, which end up to be very thin, delicate onion skins filled with silicone and sand and other things, lead us into, passing by pigmented silicone sculpture. More details here, lead into an area that is filled with these glorious, abstract and highly colorful forms. So this is your newest work, and we'll talk about it in much greater detail. But first I wanted to talk to you about the fact that this wasn't the show that you had originally planned to put on view at this particular time. Can you tell me what happened and why?
Sure. Well, surprise, surprise, Corona, COVID-19, global pandemic. Really, you know, I was fortunate that this was one of the, that I didn't have too much difficulty brought on to me by the pandemic. But yeah, this Corona definitely affected the show. I was originally meant to do a solo show, and I was more interested in thinking about art that was like coming back into my orbit and like my thinking more about artists that I knew. And I was more interested in kind of organizing a group exhibition with myself and several other artists. So that was just in the very beginning phases. And I had confirmed a few of the artists at that point, but yeah, of course, they were all based in New York and Berlin. So of course, at that point when the shutdown happened, it just felt, one, not technically feasible, and two, just not the thing that was on the forefront of people's minds, because it was just right at the beginning and the show was meant to go up in May. So it would have been a little tight. So originally Ari, who's the director of Franz Kaka, was, we weren't even sure that the gallery would open at all. But as things kind of changed and progressed every day and every week, we kind of kept that conversation open as to whether I wanted to do something on my own. I certainly didn't feel like it was the right space to do something that felt as involved as some of my other installations have felt. Not to say that this didn't involve any labor or anything, but just in terms of like the kind of use of installation materials and things like that, and sourcing materials. So I kind of circled back to this work that I made back in January of 2020. I made it at the Banff Center, and I wasn't thinking of showing this work when I made it. I definitely didn't think I would be showing it as a solo presentation, but this piece came back into my thinking, and then it just kind of developed from there. And when I finally committed to show the work, the rest of the elements, like the onion skin and the silicone, like you were clicking through, those became more intuitive additions to the space to create more of like an installation in there.
Right. You've talked about this piece as something of a gift to yourself,
Yeah.
which is really, I think, such a lovely way to think about the work. I mean, so often artists are creating work, they're creating work for an audience. And I sort of love that this is one you made for yourself in a way. And in a sense, it's in this context, almost prescient in its making. And then of course, in its presentation seems almost exactly the right timing for it.
Yeah.
Can you?
It was a,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go on.
No, please.
Yeah, it was made as a birthday gift to myself. It was, I was going to the Banff Center for a residency as a part of the Barbara Spohr Memorial Award, which is an award that they give to any artist that works with photography, etc., or just photography. But in my case, it's more than photography. And so I was there to do just a kind of a self-guided residency without any output demanded or any like you don't show anything or there's no theme. So I was excited to go back to Banff for the second time, and I definitely was coming off of the heels of feeling like I'd been traveling a lot and doing shows back to back and feeling a bit tired, feeling very grateful and like you know, enlivened by that, but also feeling like I wanted to do something just for myself. And I wanted to go in the color dark rooms because I'd been in color dark rooms since I was in undergrad, and I knew I wanted to experiment and play. And yeah, I was about to turn 35, which I don't know if people know, but like our bodies and our lives move in 7-year cycles. So I was at the beginning of a 7-year cycle, or I was just on the cusp of beginning a 7-year cycle. So it felt like it was just something nice to do for myself that felt both experimental and indulgent. And yeah.
That's so great. I have lots of questions about this work, but I hadn't realized that the residency you were there for was actually in honor of Barbara Spohr, who is, I think, an extraordinary artist who tragically died too young, and experimented in her own way with color processes and the sort of symbolic and narrative elements of the medium. So that makes it even, I think, more special, in fact. So if you don't know, for those of you listening, if you don't know her work, please look her up. So let's talk about what we're seeing here, the components of what you installed at Franz Kaka. We've got photograms, we've got the onion skins, the silicone sculpture. Can you talk about, we talked about this, you know, what gave rise to it, but further motivations or further, what are the materials at play here?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with the photograms because the rest of the work was kind of situated in relation to them. But yeah, beyond it just being this fun gift to myself, it was out of this gathering of these bags that I'd been collecting for, I think 3 or 4 years at that point, maybe 2 to 4 years, 2-3 years. And I'd been drawn to them because of their kind of meshiness. Yeah, they're bags that carry onions and firewood. So they're very economical. They're pretty ubiquitous. They're industrially made, but like up close, they're these beautiful weavings. They're made out of plastic. And I was drawn to them because of their kind of see-through quality. And I was thinking of them as skins or and as skins as carriers for a body as well. So it was some sort of stand-in for a body to me. And yeah, so I had a bunch of them collected in my studio over time, and I have an ongoing interest in carriers in my work, or vessels or things that hold and gather and collect. And so I wanted to make a body of work that kind of repetitively explored this bag, but also allowed the bag to become more abstract, strange, both like terrestrial feeling and extraterrestrial feeling, both in like the details, the tears, as well as the color and the tone. I was really thinking about not just earthly landscapes, but Martian landscapes and and now potentially Venus landscapes. But yeah, and thinking about earth and skin, flesh, thinking about things that both enter a body and come out of it, like fluids that come out of our bodies, things that enter our bodies. I was thinking a lot about moods and auras, feelings, and a lot of internal and external kind of processes and affects that I was trying to channel as I was like trying to get these tones in the work. And yeah, and then and when I decided to install the work, the onion skins I like having sculpture in relation to image work because they play off each other so well, and it really situates the viewer, it situates the body in the space. And so the onion skins were my own that I had around, as well as many other pantry staples all of a sudden from March onwards. And it was really just like, yeah, a weird moment to realize that I'd been collecting these bags that hold these like staples or provisions. And obviously in March, that word or that idea changed so radically for so many people. And I was thinking a lot about, for me, I was thinking a lot about like these objects that both nourish and build, but also cause destruction. So I was thinking a lot about what I was nourishing, what I was carrying, what I'm building, and what I'm burning, what I'm shedding. And so in this space, the onion skins kind of functioned for me as like sheddings of skin. And if the photograms of the bags are the skin of the body, then the silicone mat that you kind of encountered immediately upon coming into the gallery that was lying on the ground was the flesh. So it was kind of like a dispersed body in the space for me, but also like a show of tools. I guess I called it devices because it plays on both like devising, planning, as well as usefulness or functionality.
One of, I think, an important touchstone text for you in recent years has been Ursula Le Guin's 1986 essay, The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And as part of this essay, she writes, and I'm just going to read a short excerpt. We've all heard all about all the sticks and spears and swords, the things to bash and poke and hit with, the long, hard things. But we have not heard about the thing to put things in, the container for the thing contained. That is a new story. That is news. Which, you know, thinking about, you've talked about these bags that carried onions or firewood or the body even. There's some clear connections to what you've been making here. But what questions in general has this essay prompted for you in your work?
So many, and it's like an essay that I return to so much and that I share quite widely as well. And yeah, it's a fantastic essay, and it's just, for me, it makes me, you know, my interest in exploring the body as an ongoing process, and this idea of the carrier bag, or like this internal space of gathering and making, are so akin to each other. And further along in the text, Le Guin also writes that like she kind of takes us through like more and more carriers that like we're basically in this endless nesting doll, or like Russian babushka doll of carriers that, you know, and then the bodies that we're in are a carrier bag, and then the rooms that we're in are a bag, and the house that we're in, and then the world. So it just becomes I guess like a fractal or something like that, endlessly. And that just for me, it speaks so much to relationality, and because my work was thinking so much about ongoing sensitivity and a kind of becoming with, rather than like a fixed kind of singular self or a body or object, it foregrounds care, you know, this act of choosing, of gathering and putting together, and it points to like a cycle, a circularity. Yeah, it's an important text for me, and it's kind of an inversion of a phallic kind of object of the sword, which I liked as well.
I want to highlight here just as a detail of a few of the photograms that are part of this piece. Will you just explain very quickly what a photogram is for those who don't know?
I'll try my best. I'm not a technical artist by any means, even though I did go to art school. And every time I try to explain how I made these to someone, I feel like a bit of a dummy, but it was very experimental. A photogram is, and please feel free to jump in and correct me, Sophie, because I'm sure you can explain the process better, but it's an image made without a negative. And it's usually made
or a camera, for that matter.
Right, a camera or a negative. So yeah, those two steps are not even a part of the process, and it basically creates an imprint of an object. It has to do with direct contact between the surface of the paper and the materiality of the paper, and then the object that's placed on top. And so you're kind of exposing an object rather than exposing a negative image that you've already captured outside of that space.
And I think one of the important things to underline is, of course, that the objects that you see here in these photograms, the bags, they are of course size as, because it's connected. The object is literally lying on top of the photographic paper and light passes through it. And the different thicknesses or different of the weave or of the material, of course, holds back light to differing degrees, which gives you this kind of amazing and always somehow surprising range of tones.
Yeah, and depth. I was so surprised because, as you know, a bag is, there's two sides because it's dimensional. And just seeing the weave from both sides and the detail on some of the images, sometimes you're doing it in the dark too. So, which is what I like about this process, is like you're kind of working blindly. But I would kind of, in some instances try to expand the bag a bit so that it wasn't resting so flat against the other side. And so that's where you see these kind of almost moire-like patterns start to emerge. And just the way that the material can perceive depth is quite fascinating for me.
No, it's one of the, the first and simplest sort of methods of creating photographic images, right? William Henry Fox Talbot created what he called his sun pictures, which are essentially botanical specimens laid on top of sensitized paper and exposed to the sun. So I love that kind of link back to this very simple and early processes, which still give us today extraordinary, and as you can see, sort of compelling, surprising results. You of course have had the advantage of working with color materials, and tell us a little bit about that color selection.
Yeah, I'll just say one quick thing about photograms that I forgot to say that I like about them is it's about contact. There's a direct contact that I appreciate with that process. And I think that's why I was drawn to it, because it is inherently very tactile and extremely relational. Like it's direct touching. But yeah, so I was thinking a lot about these colors in relation to my own body, the internal landscape of my body, or what I was calling the internal scaffold of my body, as well as a lot of the earthly colors I was seeing around me, both in like a natural sense and in the industrial sense of living in the city of Toronto and walking around construction sites all the time. And in their in-between states, there's a lot of dirt, a lot of mud, and I was thinking a lot about those colors, but also trying to think about forms of world making that weren't just that, which is why I'm drawn to people like Ursula Le Guin or Octavia Butler. And yeah, so I was thinking about those colors. I knew I wanted to find something in that range, but in the color darkroom, again, I may butcher this, but there are 3 filters that you have to play with that are on the enlarger. They're kind of up here. And they are magenta, yellow, and cyan. That's correct, right? Yeah. Okay. So, and so normally you get, a normal range of colors, but I shifted the filters quite drastically, and it took me a bit of a good number of sheets of photo paper to get to the original tone that I was trying to start with, which was the green tone. And it's an extractive process. Is that how you would describe it? In that if you want more magenta, you take out magenta. And if you want more yellow, you take out yellow. But as you do that, it affects the other two filters. So it's some sort of technical wizardry that I definitely didn't fully understand. And I just fumbled my way through until I found the right starting point. And then I proceeded to make the next 34 photograms in relation to that first one by slightly tweaking the filtration levels each time. So none of them have the exact same filtration levels. So they each have their own tone, even though some of them look quite similar in tone. But it was important for me to maintain that kind of connective vein through them all, even though this was definitely not the order I made them in. I'm not that technically precise, but I was able to stay within a range that the range that I was looking for through that process. And then hanging them it felt important for me to highlight the fact that I saw it as one piece, as like a singularity that exists as a multitude, or a single work that exists as a multitude. And so the decision to install them in this kind of sheath-like way across the wall was for me the way to architecturally respond to the space without having to do something like I've done in the past, like build a wall.
Right. And there was the effect, I think, because essentially the photograms create a you when you're standing as a viewer in the space. You are surrounded really on the kind of immediate three sides by the work. So it does feel there's a sort of an enveloping effect that occurs.
Yeah.
It does feel like you are actually in a container of some kind.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to move on maybe to some related, couple of an earlier work actually. One of the first exhibitions of yours I really remember seeing that we'd done studio visits before a few years ago. This is at the Ernst Project space that used to be on Queen West from 2013. A work you've just called Untitled, and 50 sheets of unfixed and unprocessed photographic paper. So this engagement with the photosensitive material is something that has been there since the beginning of your work. I think there are some links between her own devices in this piece where you have a structured presentation, but within it there is so much variation. Here, the variation is created by dipping each sheet into developer. But of course, you're leaving that unfixed. So normally you would, quote unquote, fix the image by putting it through other kind of chemical baths and washing so that the image would remain permanent insofar as it can be permanent. But you're in fact trying to do the opposite. You're trying to create conditions where the image will in fact shift and change over time. Why is that aspect important to you, and what are you drawing our attention to as viewers as far as the photographic process is concerned, or even the nature of photography is concerned?
Yeah, this is an earlier work, but I think back to it often as well because I think it's so foundational in a way. But I was really thinking about, the structural determinants or the structures of image making, which has expanded into like the structures of making sculpture or things like that. But I was thinking about those structures as non-neutral conditions of where an image might be produced, and really thinking about how to use like the idea of misuse of an image or misuse of materials and what kind of results that brings about, and how that is often more contingent on the body that's making it. So there's another sense of non-neutrality embedded in the work. And thinking about the photo paper as a skin, as porous, as being like permeable, and in this case, 50 sheets is often how many sheets come in a box of paper. And so it felt like I was trying to intervene as little as possible while making the body very evident. And you don't really see it in these photos, but it depended on the day. If it was, I think it was a summer show or late fall show, I'm forgetting, or maybe it was spring, but on humid days, the paper would all curl up at the bottoms because it was only hinged at the top, and I wanted that sense of flappiness or malleability to remain like evident in the work. So it would really respond to the environment, and I was interested in that and thinking about them as they're full of things that are still they're inorganic, but in many ways organic as well.
Right. I like that sense of unfixedness, which is not just in the image layer, but then also in the way you've installed it, and that you're kind of leaving an image open to being affected by the conditions in which it's shown, the conditions in which we all are affected by our own conditions. So there's something very kind of poetic to that. You, I think, moved fairly well in recent years. I suppose the last, we'll talk about your recent show at Oakville, which I think marks another shift. But in recent years, you've been really thinking about pushing this notion of the photographic paper as skin even further by creating wall installations like these. So this is a more recent example, but it's been for the last, I'd say, 2016, 2017. You've been occupied with creating these open structures to which the photographs sit almost as literally as skins. Can you tell us more about that shift, about creating this sort of almost skeletal frame for the pictures?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about the Aaron Stump show, it started as this exploration of the material as mutable matter and changing matter, and something that was contingent on my body, and then therefore speaking to the body and of the body all the time. And then I started building these walls where I was showing some smaller works attached to the skeletal frame, and that was the first time I explored this more architectural intervention, where the intervention was also a support for other images. And then it moved into trying to incorporate, like trying to make the wall a fuller body in and of itself, and skinning them fully with sheets of photo paper and film at an industrial scale. And really thinking about the walls as, you know, they have these vertebrae, they're meant for building flexible or like curved walls, but usually are obviously hidden away by drywall and whatnot. But I was drawn to their both human boniness as well as non-human kind of resemblances or similarities. And it became a way for me to kind of combine all those interests in one, and for them to exist as like very hybrid beings between architectural intervention, imaging support, a sculpture in and of itself, and site responsive installation. And yeah, so what we're looking at here is installed at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery, and this was installed in a space that used to be a library and is now part of their gallery, but it's filled with this beautiful light. And so in this case, I really wanted to work with Duratrans film, which is another light sensitive material that is really glossy. It's also, it has like a translucency to it, so light can pass through it. And so I knew I wanted to highlight that about the material in the space. And the work is called Endo, which means inwards. And all these images were made on my studio windows. I taped them to the insides of my windows and let the film tan for anywhere between like a week to months. And in that case, I was kind of imaging the outside from the inside, but because they're translucent, each side has a different like color tone and variances of shadows and contrasts and things like that. And then alongside that, again, thinking about building worlds and this idea of soft monumentality, like, you know, something that is built that inherently has a changeability to it, both in what it's holding as well as in its structural making. Were these, so beside this work was the series of sandbags that I sourced in Korea. They're construction bags or sandbags, but I was drawn to them because of their fleshy colors, and they have these bruises from, like, you know, the industrial stamps and things like that. And on top of them were these cast objects. This one had cast Asian pears that I got cast with the styrofoam protective skin still placed on it. And really thinking about foods that I'm accustomed to eating growing up, that I feel like are some manifestation of like a they've like calcified in my body, but also thinking about some fictional space in which they become parts of like structuring a different space, a new space. They become structural through their aluminum kind of materiality.
And I love this reversal, you know, in a way, I'll go back to the kind of wider view where this kind of metal structure and this commercially produced photographic paper made of kind of plastics and other things, you know, you're pushing its ability to sort of signal something softer, something more human really than the kind of inert materials they're made from. And then casting the fruit. There was also ginseng root, I believe, and cabbage leaves, if I recall correctly, on the bags, kind of over on the left, making those kind of organic forms kind of stand in a new way. This reversal, I guess, of what is supposedly, you know, inorganic and organic, I think is very touching and very, I find I really want to pick up one of those Asian tones in this, and the way that everything is sort of folding and accumulated over time. I find it very kind of compelling to see. Do you want to say anything about that? You mentioned really these foods that you grew up with and a sort of the sandbags from Korea. Do you want to say anything about that kind of, I don't know, those as cultural symbols in any way?
Yeah, I mean, the word Asian pear is so funny because it's kind of, I understand it, but there's also something strange and funny about that to me, to kind of place something that's so ubiquitous as only from a certain part of the world. And it's a way for me to play with identity, and in a way that, you know, I never feel like I'm speaking directly to my identity, and that's not something I'm interested in, though I don't believe there's a hierarchy in how artists should or should not be speaking to their identities, but I'm really interested in actually, it's Trinh Minha, who's a filmmaker and theorist, who often talks about speaking nearby rather than speaking directly to. And I really think that's something that I try to do in my work, as well as speaking around identity and speaking around the body, in order to potentially find something that is more, it's harder to articulate, but it's very real in a different sort of way. So the foods for me, yeah. And the foods for me were an intuitive kind of move to, you know, they're a familiar object that I've digested and metabolized numerous times in my life. So they definitely felt of my body, or like I said, like they're calcified nodes in my body or something like that. But there were also some cast dried anchovies, which, you know, growing up in a Korean household, there's often things with like smells that I was sensitive to or paranoid of, in this way that I see that experience very, very differently now, coming from, you know, a background with immigrant parents and being raised in a mostly non-Asian community, at least outside of our family community, just in school and things like that. So I guess it's a way for me to also reclaim some of the shame that I felt, and represent these things as like tools in a way.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'll just leave that there. That's so we want to think about this other. So you spent a few years and made a number of major pieces of, like that piece of the Southern Alberta Art Gallery that is very architectural and skeletal in that same way, the body architecture, the room architecture. And here, and some of works like that were included in this exhibition at Oakville Galleries at the Gerlach Gardens space. But you also created this piece that's entirely on the floor called Molt. And here you see a broader view of it. Photographic paper laid directly on the floor in a space called the Sunroom, which is facing sort of southwest, I guess, of the, in that space. Will you tell us a little bit about this piece and what it meant to kind of move to the floor all of a sudden, or I should present it as a sudden move, but in this kind of specific move, you've gone from the wall to the floor.
Yeah. I mean, if I know we're not going to look at the rest of the show, but the entire show was thinking a lot about horizontality, and the entire floor, essentially, entire show, sorry, which was spread out across 4 different rooms in the gallery or the house, was all on the floor. And I guess I was thinking that I'd spent the last 2 years building up all these worlds, or building up these spaces through the walls and verticality, and now I wanted to think about deconstructing so that there's more of like an endless loop in my thinking that has to do a lot with building, unbuilding, and rebuilding, and that is a constant ongoing process. And with this show, this sunroom is not really used as a space for artists show work because it's very volatile to the environment. Like the screens are not, in fact, some of the screens are not even there a lot of the time. It's just that door that you see in the far corner of the photo. And so it's really subjected to the environment, wind, rain, snow. It's on the southwest, so it got all the sun, it got all the sunsets and things like that. But of course I was really drawn to that, and I was really drawn to the idea of the sunroom as if the house is a body or a carrier, then a sunroom is a kind of membrane that is both inside and outside, because it's attached to the house. So it's not quite inside, but it's not quite fully outside either. And I liked that kind of in-betweenness that it represented. And then I really wanted to create this installation that felt super contingent on the space, and really subject it to change. And this photograph was taken at the beginning of the show, and I think the show was up for almost 3 months, so the material changed quite a bit. And a lot of this material, most of this material, was reused from various wall installations that I had been putting up over the last years. And so I was able to, the techs at the gallery, I asked them to salvage the material for me. So I still have it back in my studio, and my plan is to reuse it, but it's really wild, all the changes that happened, which I didn't document here, but yeah, it felt like a little garden to me, this space.
Can you describe 1 or 2 of the changes that you remember in particular?
Like really psychedelic blue colors, like whites and yellows, almost looking tie-dyed together at times, because there would be like, snow, rain coming in, and then just sitting there, and then humidity from heat. It's I'm excited to see what I might do. Some of the fiery reds, and you know what, I think, because I did this show before I went to Banff, and maybe some of the colors from those works were kind of infecting my thinking, and transferred onto that photogram work.
No, I think it's such an incredible expansion of some of the ideas you started with at the Aaron Stump exhibition. Of course, the idea that it's the sunroom, I think, again, I mentioned the Talbot sun pictures, where you literally did put things out into the sun to develop. So here you're including all the kind of range of elements that we're subjected to as beings in the world. I find it very, very compelling for that. The title Molt, of course, it as you explained, some of it is from past installations that you've done. So it seems this kind of the things that sort of fall away over time, that are maybe not old, but kind of are being replaced by something new. I think it's also an interesting kind of cycle to go through as an artist with your own work. Not to have to kind of reinvent it, I suppose.
Right, you're always integrating, you're always carrying something with you as you shed and regenerate.
Well, I'm sure that there are people who are eager to ask you questions, so I don't want to monopolize you for too much longer, but I do want to ask one last question, which is that in recent months, and this is sort of partly perhaps a response to our current moment, but you started acupuncture school. Can you tell us why?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh, man. Acupuncture school it's an idea, or like the desire to go has really been in my thinking in orbit for a few years now, but it just never felt like, it's like, how will I ever have the time to devote to that. It didn't feel like it was within my grasp. But over the course of the pandemic, obviously we've all been home. I wasn't traveling. And it just felt like it just felt right, I guess, to explore this form of, it's a really creative healing practice, or yeah, it's a healing practice. And it's very creative and has a lot of overlaps with what I'm thinking about in my work. But I was also thinking about how, you know, just wanting to be able to output something into the world that art operates on a very different level, more affective. But I was drawn to doing something that felt immediately palpable as well. And so it felt like the right time to just dive in and try it. So I'm about a month in now, and it's been a lot. It's been a lot of, the theory is fascinating to me, you know, Chinese medicine theory, yin yang theory, and meridian theory, all those things I love. And then things like anatomy are a little trickier, but I'm getting into it. And I definitely see a lot of overlap with my practice. And I see it as an extension of my art practice, as well as a way to bring in a new practice into my life.
Another mode of, I suppose, perception and analysis.
Yeah, you know, it's like thinking about the body as a non-singular being, and acupuncture is so much about recognizing the pattern of a person. And in order to see that pattern, you have to look at both, you have to locate both the visible and invisible forces that shape that body, or that are affecting that body, or pathogenic to that body, or what will nourish that body, as well as, yeah, be able to perceive both inside and outside. So it's really inspiring to me in that way. And we'll see where it goes.
I'll look forward to seeing, well, I'm sure we'll all look forward to seeing how that feeds into your artwork. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and then we'll have time to take a couple of questions. All right. So one question that has come about the title, Her Own Devices, for the work you just showed at Franz Kaka. Can you say something about why that's the title of that piece?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I was thinking about the bag as a tool, as well as, in a way, onions and firewood are tools or devices that we can use towards other means. But also that this idea of her own devices, you know, left to her own devices, or it points to a kind of a necessity to plan or to organize. And because I was thinking about all these things of like, what am I building, what am I gathering and nourishing, and what needs to burn, it felt appropriate to have that be a part of the title.
Well, and I think too about, and I don't know if this played into it for you, but thinking back to the Le Guin text, which is very much a kind of feminist way of reading the history of the world, or the history of kind of culture and human activity. It's also very, I think the her to me stands in that kind of larger, more general way.
Yeah, in a way, maybe even thinking about like, if in a very sci-fi kind of manner of like, left to her own devices, what world would she build, kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, and often that term, you know, being left to your own devices can sometimes have a negative thing, like you're going to get up to trouble. But I like that kind of troubling of that, in fact, to sort of be, it would be generative and radical. Let's see, I have not seen any other questions, if we still have time for a couple more. Nothing coming up just yet. I guess to go back to acupuncture for a second, are you seeing, you talked a lot about this sense of thinking about the boundary between the inside and the outside. How is acupuncture sort of adding to your sense of that?
Well,
so
it's
far?
just, it's like, in an incredible way. Well, one, I know I was complaining about anatomy, but learning anatomy is really allowing me to appreciate and understand where things are in the body and what their functions are. But then in the other sense of learning about, you know, the cycles that our bodies move through constantly, and then the bigger cycles that are that cycle is contained in, and it is an endless fractal in that way again. But that you know, the way you help someone through acupuncture is a needling of the surface, the outside, the skin, which completely affects this incredible network of channels on the inside, which is, the channels are all affected by the organs, which have their own kind of energetic frequencies that can be affected. And so everything is this this incredible connected network that is completely contingent on what is in the body, but also what is in the body because of what is outside of the body. Yeah, it's been really fascinating. There's a lot of memorization, and I think a lot of it will just be repetition, but I'm really loving seeing that. And there's beautiful diagrams that I'm just fascinated by, and yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think, don't see any other. I will just check in. No further questions at this stage. Oh, all right. No, one more question here. So, question for you, of course. Can you talk about the metaphor of instability in your unfixed images? Also hearing you speak to the body a lot, I'm wondering if you, being a twin, prompts any thoughts about photography in terms of notions of difference and repetition. So actually 2 questions in there, one about instability and unfixedness, and the other about the experience of being a twin and how that might affect your work.
That's such a good question. And I see that it's from my friend Paul, which I appreciate. Hi, Paul, thanks. No, it's such a nice observation, and something that I often end up getting to, but I didn't in this case. So I'm grateful that he brought this up. But yeah, you know, I am an identical twin, and I grew up without, or I was conceived and shaped, and then came into the world as with a sense of being double and not singular. And I know that sounds really cheesy, but that is truly how I felt as a body. You know, my twin and I were super close, and we always felt, for me, there was no boundary between our bodies, or no boundary between understanding her body as distinct from mine. And so I think that having that completely ingrained in my physicality and psyche has definitely shaped why I'm drawn to ideas of instability or unfixedness and multiplicity in these ways. And also, yeah, and I think also my thinking about epigenetics and acupuncture, you know, identical twins obviously share the same DNA, and yet you can be different in the world in so many ways, which epigenetics is unpacking and saying that, yeah, DNA is not fixed. It's triggered by the environment, or it expresses itself in relation to the environment. And so being an identical twin, that has been a point of interest and research for me. And then TCM, or acupuncture, is kind of like, we've been saying this for centuries. So I'm just learning it again in a language that is just really clicking for me. And yeah, so I think that this all comes from a very personal space, but again, this interest in speaking nearby the work is something that remains. But I do so appreciate when people are attuned to those details.
Thank you, Laurie. I think we will end our talk there. It's really exciting to spend time with you and hearing about the work and how it's progressed over these years. And I can't wait to see what comes in the next few years.
Thank you, Sophie. I so appreciated all your thinking and piecing all this together. And yeah, it's been such a pleasure.
Excellent. See you soon.
Okay, take care.